Last week, as 2025 was ending, the phrase time to climb kept popping in my mind. Over and over, I couldn't get rid of that thought, and I tried to process it and think about what does this mean for me? And I know for some of y'all, you're thinking, oh yeah, God's about to take us to a greater level. It's time to climb. We're moving on up for what God has. But this one about that. For me, it seemed like a little bit more of a challenge because I've never been afraid to do a lot of things like that, or at least at one time in my life I won't. I mean, I was the guy, I've climbed cell phone towers, I've climbed water towers, I've climbed tall buildings. I'm the one that if we're at the top of a high mountain or high rock, I'm gonna climb to the edge and I'm gonna hang my feet over and I'm gonna look down while everybody behind me is looking around trying to think, what's this guy doing? Why is he doing that? Because what's the one thing when we see people do that kind of stuff, we always have that thought of, I couldn't do that. And I noticed I was losing that aspect about me. See, to make this personal, a couple years ago, I started having irregular heart rhythms, and anytime I would do something that my adrenaline kicked up, or I got excited, or I got stressed, I would kick into that rhythm. It wouldn't last but for a little while and it would be over, but I started noticing myself backing down on a lot of the things that I used to love to do, or things I pushed myself to do or encouraged myself to do, and I don't do that anymore. And I felt God when He said it's time to climb. I didn't think about what He had for me up there. I thought about the reason that so many people don't climb. It's those times that I would tell them about the things that I did that scared them to death. They'd always say, I can't do that. And it wasn't because of what they were afraid if they found when they got to the top. They were afraid of what would happen if they fell. And that fear of failure was starting to take over me. I was starting to worry more about what would happen. What would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? I can't do that anymore, or I'm not going to push the limits here, and I'm not going to do that. And I was telling my wife this, and she's like, oh, you're not about to do something crazy, are you? Please don't do something real crazy. And it's not about that. It's about pushing the limits, because it's not always about what God has for you at the upper level. It's what He does for you along the way. See, what I always understood when I climbed was that my safety gear would hold me. You know, I watched from Yosemite. We took a trip out to Yosemite a couple years ago, and we stood at the base of El Capitan and looked up, and you could barely see these people that were climbing up the rock. Now, this isn't the guy that did free solo, that did it without any ropes, clips, anchors, or anything like that. These people had their safety gear. They climbed. They were prepared. They were ready, had everything they needed, but they knew that if they failed, their gear would catch them. Yeah, they had to be in shape, and they had to train, and they had to be ready, but they had gear that protected them. And I always had faith in my equipment. When I climbed cell phone towers, when I climbed water towers, when I climbed buildings, I don't do it without a safety rope.